Okay, so we're diving into something today that's got me kind of, well, fired up, to be honest.
And I hear you. It's been hard to ignore.
This whole Christian nationalism thing, it's everywhere in the news. And, we always try to cut through the noise here, get to the heart of it.
Absolutely.
You sent over some articles, and honestly, some of the stuff J.D. Vance is saying at these rallies,
Yeah, his speech.
it's concerning, to say the least.
It's definitely raising a lot of red flags. And not just about Vance himself, but about this movement that seems to be gaining more and more traction.
Right, and that's what we got to unpack. Because it's not just political junkies who should care about this. This stuff has implications for, well, everyone, really.
It really does, especially for communities that are already marginalized and facing discrimination. We're talking about religious freedom, social justice, the very fabric of what it means to be American. It's that big.
Exactly. So before we even get into the specifics of Vance's speech, let's define Christian nationalism. Because I have a feeling a lot of people hear that phrase and don't really grasp what it actually means.
It's tricky, right? Because on the surface, it sounds pretty self-explanatory, but it's way more loaded than that. Essentially, it's this idea that the U.S. is and always has been a Christian nation and that we should be governed according to those principles.
So they're talking about merging religious and political power, like completely.
Pretty much, and they see it as this righteous mission to take back America, restore it to what they believe it's meant to be.
And that's where it gets really problematic, right? Because that whole Christian nation idea, it's a complete misrepresentation of history. I mean, hello, separation of church and state, anyone.
It's a huge problem. The Founding Fathers were incredibly intentional about creating a system where everyone had the freedom to practice their own religion, or no religion at all, without government interference. They were fleeing religious persecution, for goodness sake. It's right there in the Constitution.
It's like they skipped a whole semester of history class. But somehow this idea still has so much power. Why do you think that is? What makes this narrative so appealing, even though it's historically inaccurate?
I think it's this longing for a simpler time, a time when things seemed clearer, more certain.
Right, like this nostalgia for a past that maybe never even existed.
Exactly. And for some people, this idea of a Christian nation taps into that nostalgia. It represents a return to traditional values, a sense of order and stability in a world that feels increasingly chaotic.
It's like cherry-picking history to fit a narrative. And the thing is, it works.
Yeah.
It's a powerful tactic. But let's get into some of those specifics, because you flagged a few quotes from Vance's speech that really jumped out at you.
Oh, yeah, there were some doozies in there. Quotes that really give you a sense of what this ideology looks like in action, and how he's using language to manipulate people's fears. Like, he keeps using this term socialist to describe certain public school curricula.
That was a big one. Claiming they're poisoning kids' minds with these dangerous ideas, which is such a loaded term, poisoning.
Intentionally so. It's about creating this image of something harmful, something that needs to be eradicated.
And then there was that line about schools teaching kids 87 different genders instead of basic math.
Oh, yeah, that's classic fear-mongering right there. Completely absurd, but it plays on people's anxieties about what their kids are learning, whether their values are being threatened.
So it's strategic. He's not just, like, ranting off the cuff here. He's using these emotionally charged words to evoke a very specific reaction.
Exactly. It's about tapping into existing anxieties, making people afraid, and then presenting himself as the solution, the protector.
The savior. It's scary how effective that can be.
And that's where we start to see the real agenda here. Because it's not just about, like, winning a few school board elections, right? This is much bigger than that.
You're talking about dominionism.
Exactly. And this is where it goes from, like, concerning to downright scary.
Okay, so break it down for us. Dominionism. It sounds intense. What's the layman's terms version of what they actually want?
Imagine a society where their version, their very specific interpretation of Christian values is the law of the land, literally.
Whoa. Okay, so not just influencing policy, but like dictating every aspect of life.
Pretty much. We're talking about controlling the media, education, business, even the arts, everything.
And this isn't just like a fringe theory. This is something they actively believe they can achieve.
Oh, absolutely. They have a whole blueprint for it, the Seven Mountains Mandate. It outlines how they're going to take dominion over 7 key areas of society: family, religion, education, media, arts and entertainment, business, and government.
It's like a checklist.
Basically. And it's not just some abstract idea either. People like Lance Wallnau, he's a big name in this movement. He's out there actively promoting this stuff. And guess who's tight with Wallnau?
J.D. Vance.
Bingo. They've been seen together at events, rallies, the whole 9 yards.
Okay, so this isn't just some fringe group meeting in a basement somewhere. This is going mainstream.
And that's what's so alarming, because when you start connecting the dots, you realize this isn't just about, like, prayer in schools or whatever. This is about a fundamental reshaping of society. And it gets even darker when you consider the historical context.
You're talking about eugenics.
I
Because, wow, that took a turn.
It's all connected. See, eugenics was about controlling reproduction, right?
Right.
Creating a better society by deciding who gets to have kids and who doesn't.
And we all know how horribly that played out. Forced sterilizations, targeting minorities, people with disabilities. It's a horrifying chapter in history.
And it's not ancient history either. This was happening in the 20th century in America. And while most people would condemn those practices today, those underlying ideologies of control and exclusion, they're still very much alive and well.
So you're saying there's a direct line from something like forced sterilization to what we're seeing today with, like, the attacks on LGBTQ rights.
It's all rooted in this idea of enforcing a very specific vision of morality, of what society should look like.
And anyone who doesn't fit that mold is seen as a threat.
Exactly. Think about it. The push for conversion therapy, the attempts to ban books about gender identity, the attacks on reproductive rights, it's all connected.
It's about control. Controlling who gets to be a part of society, who gets to make decisions, who gets to even exist.
And for folks who are already marginalized, who are already facing discrimination, this is terrifying. They're the ones who stand to lose the most.
But so this isn't just some abstract political debate. These are real people's lives we're talking about.
Exactly. And the source material actually talks about this in terms of the power threat meaning framework.
Okay, before we get into that, I got to ask, because I know some people listening are probably freaking out right now. If someone's listening to this and they're thinking, this is terrifying, but what can I even do? What do you tell them?
That's the question, isn't it? It's easy to feel powerless in the face of something this big, this entrenched. But the truth is, we all have a role to play in pushing back against these harmful ideologies.
Okay, so action steps. Let's talk about those. We've gone pretty deep on the power threat meaning framework. How does that help us actually do something?
The PTMF, it's not just about understanding the problem, right? It's about finding ways to heal, to resist, to create change.
So it's like less about dwelling on the fear and more about channeling that energy into something productive.
Exactly. Like the source material, it mentions this question a lot of people are asking themselves. What are these people's plans for me if they get their wish? And that's a question we need to sit with, as uncomfortable as it is.
Because if they succeed in creating this society, they envision what happens to everyone else, to women, to people of color, to the LGBTQ community. It's a scary thought.
It is. But here's the thing. Acknowledging that fear, it's not about giving in to despair. It's about fueling our resistance. It's about saying, not on my watch, not if I have anything to say about it.
So what can we actually do? Besides, staying informed and all that, what are some concrete actions we can take?
Well, first of all, don't underestimate the power of your voice. Talk to people. Have those uncomfortable conversations with your family, your friends, your coworkers. You'd be surprised how many people are receptive to hearing a different perspective, especially if it comes from someone they trust.
So it's about meeting people where they are, having those one-on-one conversations that can sometimes make all the difference.
Absolutely. And sometimes just planting a seed of doubt, getting people to question the narratives they've been fed, that's a huge win.
Okay, what else? Because I know there are folks who are ready to, get out there and do something.
Support organizations that are fighting on the front lines, groups that are advocating for LGBTQ rights, racial justice, reproductive freedom, inclusive education. They need our money, they need our time, they need our voices.
So put your money where your mouth is, right?
Exactly. And vote. Vote in every election, local, state, national. Because who we elect to office has a direct impact on whether these ideologies gain power or get pushed back.
That's a good reminder. It's easy to get caught up in the big national elections, but those local races, those school board elections, they matter just as much.
More, sometimes, because that's where a lot of these battles are being fought, at the local level.
This has been a lot to unpack. It's heavy stuff, but so important. I feel like we could talk about this for another hour, but we're running out of time. Any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I would just say this. Don't give up hope. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, to feel like we're fighting a losing battle. But there are so many people out there who are fighting for a better future, a more just and equitable society. We can't lose sight of that.
That's a powerful message. So, to our listeners, thank you for sticking with us through this deep dive. It's been, well, intense, to say the least, but we hope you found it informative, maybe even a little empowering.
It's been a pleasure joining you, as always.
And remember, this isn't the end of the conversation. Keep learning, keep talking, keep fighting for the world you want to see. Thanks for listening, everyone.